Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
It's Vivek, a little low volume, but
Okay, I'm audible now.
yeah.
Okay. So let's start today's workshop. It's about reverse engineering and malware analysis. Just a sec. Yeah. So this workshop will be about reverse engineering malware analysis. So basically, so first of all, I'm Vivek Parekh. I'm your host for this meeting, and I'm working in CyberRange as a senior software developer. I have a bit of hands-on experience with reverse engineering and malware analysis. So in this workshop, I'll be teaching you basics of that. So basically, what is reverse engineering? So it's in general, it's an understanding of the inner working of a system or deriving its blueprint from its functional sample. Uh, that can be termed as reverse engineering. So reverse engineering basically is to how to to dissect any given system and to understand the deep technical details about it. So in software field, reverse engineering is often used when you do not have the generally when you do not have the source code of a software or a malware, and you want to understand that how exactly software or a malware is functioning. So the common motivation for reverse engineering is basically these four fields: malware analysis, vulnerability research, software protection, and program analysis. So in malware analysis, reverse engineering is useful for the people working in the antivirus industry, people working in the IDS, IPS industry. So IDS is intrusion detection system, and IPS is intrusion prevention system. Okay, so for those people, it is useful. In the field of vulnerability research, it's useful for people who are into exploit development or vulnerability or patch analysis. Okay, so in software protection field, it is useful for people who design their own software protection tools. For them, reversing is useful. And finally, in the program analysis field, when there is a research into the understanding of file format and protocols. Okay, so the basic approach in reverse engineering is basically you need to define your scope, that what exactly are you trying to reverse engineering, try to reverse engineer, and you need to identify the technology. For example, let's say you are given any executable or any binary, and you want to see that how it is exactly made. So you need to identify that what is the technology behind it. Either is it made in C, is it made in some other programming language, C++, Rust, Python. So you need to identify that. Okay, then you need to perform dynamic and behavior analysis. So in dynamic analysis, what you basically do is you attach several dynamic analysis tools to a system, and then you try to understand that what exactly is happening. You need to, you perform dynamic analysis on it. Then basically static analysis. So static analysis in this you don't actually run any binary. All you do is simply analyze it by opening it in a static analysis tool. And finally is the validation part. Okay. So what happens with malware? So you need to identify what's the malware initial infection vector. So you need to see that how did the malware initially get on the system. So initial infection vector, it can be USB devices, it could be a malicious JavaScript and an HTML page, it could be an SQL injection attack, it could be a malicious email attachment. Okay, so some organizations, they are targeted by custom spear phishing attacks that use internal knowledge. For example, some organizations will often get news from their from a known email saying that your password will expire if you don't reset it now. Okay, so that's basically spear phishing. Spear phishing is a targeted attack. Okay, such as an email from a known person or entity. So these types of customized attacks. So in these types of attacks, what happens is all malicious Office document is also sent or PDF is sent. So on opening that, the user might get compromised. So you need to identify what's the initial infection vector. Okay, so this is a basically diagram showing how the initial point of entry happens. So it could be either a malicious attachment, it could be a file download, file transfer, it could be an auto run. Okay, so what happens is in these cases, the file gets written to disk. Okay, and then the infection happens. Obviously, the file also can be scanned by an antivirus program, but sometimes what happens is an antivirus is not able to detect that what exactly is contained in the file. Okay, so for getting started with malware analysis, you need to have a virtual machine and you need to isolate the VM network. So isolation is important here because what happens is you cannot perform malware analysis on your own host system. Because malware may perform actions that you don't know what happens to the system in that case. So just to be safe, it's always recommended to perform the malware analysis in a virtual machine. And you need to isolate the VM network. So network isolation is also required so that your IP is not visible. You need to install some common malware analysis tools. So there is a package manager called Chocolatey on Windows. So it's just behaves like APT. Okay, so on Linux, on Ubuntu, we have APT package manager. In the same way, on Windows, we have Chocolatey. So you need to understand how to capture network traffic from a Windows 10 VM. Okay, so capturing network traffic is also essential. For example, you can use Wireshark to capture network traffic. So by capturing the network traffic, you'll be able to understand that how the malware is actually behaving inside the system once it is run. Okay, where it is sending the files to, what is the command and control server of the malware, how it is interacting, what additional commands it is downloading. So you need to understand for you to be able to understand all that, you need to capture the network traffic. Okay, so while doing the analysis, you will come across these two terms, PE and ELF. So PE is your portable executable file, and ELF is executable and linkable format file. So PE is used on Windows. So every executable on Windows, you will find that its format is of type portable executable. So unless and until a file is not a portable executable, it will not be allowed to run on Windows uh, in the native format. ELF here is useful on Linux systems. So every Linux system, every executable that you will see, every native executable, it will be an ELF. So why study them? Because knowledge about them is essential for statically analyzing closed source binaries. So whenever you are trying to dissect any closed source binaries, then you will need to have the knowledge about them. So performing dynamic analysis often requires running the malicious program under the debugger. Okay, so yeah, while doing the malicious analysis, so you'll often see that you need a proper debugger to run the run the file. Okay, then understanding the file headers helps in overcoming problems occurring during debug. Okay, so file header is useful in that case. So next we have is the portable executable format. So this is the definition of portable executable format. So it's a file format for executables, object code, and DLLs used in 32-bit and 64-bit versions of Windows operating system. So DLL here is uh, dynamically linked library. Okay, so it's saying that is a file format for executables and DLLs. The term portable refers to formats versatile. Okay, so this is your standard definition. It's not really important. What's important is how you are able to like parse the PE format under any static analysis tool. Okay, so this is the structure of the PE header. So PE header is what is it is MZ header. And the first part is MZ header or DOS header. So it defines the file as an executable binary. Then there is a DOS stub, which prints a message when running DOS. So basically, when you take an executable and try to run it under MS-DOS, you will see that it outputs an error that program cannot be run in DOS. So this is just for compatibility reasons. Then you have the PE file header. Then there is image optional header, which stores the important information about the executable, like the entry count. Then there is section tables and sections. Okay, so here are some sections that might be present in the PE file. So your .code or .text section is your executable code. So whenever a binary is run, whatever execution happens always happens inside this section. No other section can execution take place. Then there is .data, which stores your data, whatever variables are there, so that data is stored here. Then there is .rdata, which is read-only data. Then there is iData, which is the importable, and eData, exportable, and resource section. Okay, so this is the PE file format visually represented. So first is a DOS header. Then inside the empty header, we have file header, optional header, and data directories. Then we have the section headers, and finally the code sections or data sections. So PE header, it contains the information the OS requires to run the executable. So this information is very useful because it can give us more information about the functionality of malware and how the malware interacts with the OS. So by examining the PE header of malware, we can see that what exactly malware is behaving, what functions it is trying to execute, uh, from which address it is starting its execution. Okay, so why is the PE header important? Because it contains all the important and necessary information required by OS to execute the binary. And then it contains the information that specifies that executor needs to be loaded in. Okay, so by examining the PE header, we can find out that where the executor is loading inside. Okay, Then there are libraries that the executable requires to be loaded. So it contains that information, and it contains information which tells us where the execution begins. Okay, then I'll just show you one demo how to examine the file format. So here I have a virtual machine with me. So this is a like Windows 7 virtual machine. So I'll be opening a tool inside it called PE Studio, which will help me analyze, which will help me take a malicious executable and analyze its PE structure. So it takes some time. So what I'll do is I'll just continue with the presentation. So this is how a executable looks under PE Studio. So we have your indicators and there's virus total field. So virus total field, what this PE Studio does is it takes the executable and uploads it to virus total. So you get that how many antivirus are detecting this executable as malicious. So you can see that 7 out of 42 antiviruses are detecting this file as malicious. Then we have your DOS header, DOS tab. This is not what is important here is on this field, these two fields, libraries and imports. So libraries tell you that how many libraries, how many DLLs this particular executable is loading, and import tells you that how many functions, what all functions are imported by this particular executable. So this is a free Windows and virtual machine. You can download this virtual machine from uh, Microsoft site. Go here, virtual machines, and you can select this. So what I did, selected IE11 on Windows 7, and whatever VM platform, whatever virtual machine you have, so generally is VirtualBox, you can download the zip here and then open it in VirtualBox. So this is the tool I was talking about, eStudio. Says that malware initial assessment. So what you can do is you can open any file here. Let's say this particular file is there. So you can see that it is actively trying to scan this. So it says that there are several indicators. Then what all antiviruses have tried to detect this particular file as malicious. Okay. Then there is a DOS header, DOS stub, switch header, file header. Okay, then there is your option header directories. So these uh, these are really just for your, you can just view them, but you won't find any important details. What's more important is the libraries and imports in that role. So libraries are what are libraries it is trying to import. So you can see that this particular file, this lab603.exe, it tries to load three libraries: kernel32.dll, wininet.dll, and adba32.dll. Then there are imports. So imports tell you what all functions this particular binary will contain. Okay, so you can see that these are all the functions. So you can see there is a blacklist field. So blacklist tells us that these particular APIs, they are blacklisted. They should not be in a binary. If they are in a binary, then generally what happens is what might happen is these functions are used for malicious purposes. So one can see that this particular binary is trying to open a URL, then it's trying to read a file from internet, and it's just trying to open that file. Okay, so these uh, these are some malicious APIs, and then you can see finally what strings are there. So strings are very useful when you want to understand that what exactly is contained in a malicious activity. So these are the several strings here, and under the value you can see. So one of the strings is practicalmalware.com. So uh, you can just take a guess that it might try to connect to this particular URL. Okay. These are some other strings. That was the demo of how to use PE Studio to explore a binary. So then we come to XCD's architecture and assembly. So while performing reverse engineering of a closed source binary, you often need to be aware of uh, how to actually examine the binary. When you try to open that binary in any static analysis tool, for example, an example of a static analysis tool is a disassembler. Okay, you need to. So Raghav has asked that what are the indicators shown in the studio? Okay, so indicators are you could say that they are certain traits that are identified by the PE Studio. So, for example, it says that file reference is a blacklisted string. Okay, file is scored by VirusTotal. Then file reference is a URL pattern. So all these indicators help you understand that okay, this is the level to which the file is malicious. So you could just think of them as your traits. Okay, traits of a binary. Then it says that the checksum is invalid. It says that file reference is a blacklisted library. So this library is we're talking about? It's talking about binanic.dll. So this library is blacklisted. Then it says that uh, file reference is a group of API. So for example, let's say it's talking about network API. So in network API, there are some particular imports that we saw. So basically, these are network API. API is your application programming interface. Just think of them as functions. Okay. So you can see that these are the network APIs. These. Okay. So these are blacklisted. So that's why it is saying that okay, this particular file is using these network APIs, so it might be blacklisted. So then it says that reference is a group of things, and there is URL pattern value. So all these are just your basic characteristics of the malware. So basically, it just helps you identify that okay, this is the extent to which the file is. So while performing static analysis on a binary, you might have to open it in a static analysis tool. For an example of that is a disassembler. Okay, so disassembler helps you gather more details about how the binary looks like, what exactly the binary is doing, but we don't run the binary. Okay, so while doing the static analysis, you need to understand the x86 file. Okay, so in x86, basically x86 is architecture designed by Intel and AMD. Okay, so it is the format for all the executables that are run on Windows and Linux. Okay, so no, yeah. So This architecture, it has three components. It has registers, stack, and CPU privilege models. Nodes. Okay. So x86 architecture, it is originally designed by Intel during 1978. So it's a CSC, complex instruction set computer. So there are two types of instruction sets. One is CISC and one is RISC. RISC is reduced instruction set computer, and CISC is complex instruction set. So RISC is used by ARM and CISC is used by x86. Okay, so it says that varying length. So whatever mnemonics are there, they might be of varying length. Okay, so it is multitasking. It has a protected memory model. There is paging and segmentation in it, and it works on 16, 32, and 64-bit flash. So you might be used to using Windows 32-bit in your computer, but now only Windows 5 only runs on Windows 64-bit. So that's what it's saying, that all these types of bitless 16, 32, and 64, they all use x86 file. So these are the registers that we usually have. These are AX, EBX, ECX, EBX, ESI, EBA, ESK, EBP. Then we have your segment registers. The most important register is the EIP register. So EIP register tells us that where exactly the program is executing on which particular instruction. So you could think of it as your pointer to the currently executing instruction. Okay. Then there are control registers, which are not really useful as analysis. So these are the various functions. EX is a accumulator register used for storing operands and result data. Then we have your EBX, which is base register. ECX is the counter register, useful for performing loop operations. So whenever you find that there is a for loop, then generally in the assembly version of it, you will see that ECX is in. Then you have EDX register. ESI and ED are used for performing memory operations. Whenever there is a string comparison or increasing of memory from one place to another, then in that case ESI and ED are used. Then there is a stack pointer register, and there is a stack data pointer register. So stack register, what it is generally used for, it tells us that what's the stack address, what is the place, what is the address where stack is located. So stack, you must be aware that stack is a very useful term. So in programming, stack is the place where the variables are stored. For example, while you are, let's say you are adding two numbers. So for adding two numbers, A and B, they must be stored on stack, and then while performing the addition, they might be retrieved again from the stack. Okay, then there is your EDP. EDP register is a stack data register. So it just tells us that what's the frame of the stack. This you can say that it's a stack frame register also. So in x86 64, these are the registers. So the registers I told you earlier, right? EX, EBX, ECX. So these were 32-bit registers. Now they are replaced by their 64-bit counterparts called RAX, RBX, RCX, RDX. Okay, so they are replaced by that. Okay, let's say that can reference low order bytes and not part of memory. So this RSP says that it's not part of the memory. So these are the 64-bit registers. Okay. Then we have the x86 call stack. So on the right hand side, you are seeing the assembly instructions for program. On the left hand side, there is this stack. Okay. So okay, so let's go through this particular program one by one. So there is this push instruction, push 0x00, push 0xFF. So what it is doing, it's pushing 0 and FF. 0xFF is an hexadecimal. Okay, so it's pushing these two values on the stack, and it is calling the sub function. So what this sub function, when it is called, what happens is the return address is pushed next. So first 0x00 was pushed, then 0xFF was pushed, then the return address was pushed on the stack. So return address is pushed because after returning from a function, uh, it needs the CPU wants to know that where to return after it has executed the function. So for example, it has executed the sub function. Okay, so sub function is push EBP, move EBP ESP. Okay, so after executing this function, where it needs to return to. So that's useful there. Okay, and then there is leave and return. Okay, so this is your function stack. This is your stack base. This is your stack top. So EBP is somewhere around here, and ESP always points at the top of the stack. So these are the privilege levels in x86 CPU. So you have your several rings here, ring 0, ring 1, ring 2, ring 3. Okay, so it just says that in ring 0 only the kernel mode software runs. For example, your kernel drivers, your kernel modules. In ring 3, your normal user application. For example, Microsoft Office, your web browser. So all these run in ring 3, and in ring 0 only your kernel software runs. So this is how a program memory looks like. So whenever you open a program, this is what a program looks like. Okay, so at the very at the high end, so at the very high end, you have the stack, and there is unused memory, and there is heap, there is uninitialized data, there is initialized data, and there is program code. So this is what a program layout looks like. I'll just tell you it's a small program that I designed how it looks like. Okay, so I'll just have collected to this particular is connected to, and then it's a Debian VM. So this is the program, and that's it. A very simple program. Adds two numbers. Try to run it. It asks for two numbers. Those are the output. Let's run this program again. We'll do is we'll get the process ID of this particular and program. Okay, so we get 8/70. Now next what we do is we try to understand that how this program looks like in the computer now. Is it audible now? Okay. So basically what we have done is we have found out the PID of this particular program. PID is your process identifier. Okay. So the process identifier tells us that what is the process ID of a particular binary when it is run in the program memory. So in this case, we got 8572. So what we'll do is we'll try to get more in depth in this process and see how it looks like in the memory. So this is the command that you use for finding out how the program actually is structured in the memory. So when you click on that, you are able to see that right from the very beginning to the end, what all modules are there. So first is obviously your add program. First is obviously your add program. So what it tells you that this add program is it starts from this particular address 56555000 and it ends somewhere around here 5655800. Then you have your program heap. Okay, then you have your LIDC. LIDC is used whenever a program calls functions like printf or getters or your common C routines. They are in this LIDC. Okay. Then we have VBAR and VDSO. It's not really important. Then you have your LD.SO. So LIDC.SO and LD.SO, you will see that these two libraries are loaded with every Linux program. So here we are examining the memory layout of a Linux program, not a Windows program. So this is how it looks like. Now what I'll do is I'll also open this particular add program in GDB. So I'll just use GDB add, and I'll just type start. Okay, so when I type start, this is what the program looks like. So in a debugger, whenever you're analyzing a binary, you'll be able to see that you see all these sections. Okay, so these registers, as I explained, you have your EX, EBX. Okay, your all these registers are here. Your EIP is here. Okay, and then EIP, as I told, it always points to the instruction which is to be executed next. Okay, then you also are seeing the source code here. Okay, you are seeing the main function here. Then there is your stack. Okay, this is your stack. Okay, okay. So this is how the program looks like when it is opened in a debugger. Okay, we can also see the program memory layout the exact same way we did with cat rock 8572 maps. We can do the same thing here. So we can do VM map, and you will be able to see this program layout is exactly the same that we studied before. Okay. So what the extension that I use for this is called PwnDBG. Okay. So what I did is I went here and I simply did these three instructions. Installation is straightforward. So I executed these three instructions and this PwnDBG was installed. So you can see that it's an extension to GDB. Okay, so it helps you gives you a clear picture of the program. Okay, now we'll do the exact same thing we did in GDB. We'll do the exact same thing with Windows. So we'll do the same thing. Let's try to open. This is your debugger in Windows. It's called X32DBG. Okay, so we'll just open any binary here, and we'll try to see what it actually looks like. So we'll just open any binary. Okay, so this is the binary is open here. Okay, so this again is EIP here. EIP, as I told, always points to the program which is the instruction which is going to execute next. Okay, so this always points to the entry point. Okay, this EIP. Okay, so these are the registers here: EX, EBX, EBP, ESP. Okay, this is your stack here. This place. Then there is a memory dump here. Okay, so this is how a program looks like when it is opened under a debugger on Windows. So we can see the memory map from here. The memory map is here. So you can see this is how a program actually looks like in the memory. Okay, so you have your main module. Okay, so you can see that it starts somewhere from 401000 and it ends at 407000 plus this 4000, the size. Okay, these are the several DLLs that are loaded. DLLs are dynamically linked libraries. Okay, these are the several DLLs that are loaded here. Okay, so this is the exact layout of the program in memory. So whenever you open a malware, this is the same layout you will see for the malware. Okay, so I have a question here. How to bind program in Windows debugger during execution? So binding, basically, it's just opening the executable with a debugger. So you just go to your debugger, just open the file here, and you try to run it. So this is an actual malware that we are running. Okay. So let me just try to run this. You can see it is showing running, and it is stopped. Okay. The same behavior you'll also see when you try to run the program in a Windows CMD. So you just try to also run it in CMD. it says that success internet connection. So failed to get command. So this is how you run it inside the debugger. You can simply open it inside the debugger and try to run it. There you can also see that what exactly is happening. You can execute one instruction at a time using the step over command. So when you see the step over command, right, you can see that one instruction at a time is getting executed. So it's saying that we have a call of get version. So this particular binary is trying to call this particular API, this particular function. So this is the GDB view that I already showed you. Okay. On the top, we have the view of the registers. Then we have the disassembly window where there are several assembly instructions that are getting executed. As you can see, it is trying to call printf. Okay. So you can see that on the 11th line, there is printf, enter two integers. The same thing you can see here. Then you have your stack, and there is a backtrace. So this is what a program looks like when it is executed in GDB. Then there is process address space. So process address space is the map, the memory map that I showed you earlier, right? That's exactly that. Every process is laid out in the same virtual memory space, regardless of the actual physical memory location. So every process feels that it is in the system alone and enjoys all the memory and that no other process exists. OS and CPU together help maintain this abstraction. So even if you open some other particular binary, you'll see that the addresses are exactly the same. So why this happens is due to concept of virtual memory. So virtual memory, in that what every process feels like that it is the only process that is executing on the entire system, and it is the only process that is present. Okay. So this is what a 32-bit program layout is in memory. We showed you cat proc maps. You have your main executable, then there are several libraries, libc.so, then you have your ld.so. Okay, so this is what a 32-bit program looks like in. So next we come on to packers. So malware authors, what they do usually to not get the malware detected by antiviruses, what they do is they use a packer. So packer is used whenever you want to hide or you want to compress your code. Okay, so packer is usually used in that case. Okay, so whenever a packer is present, chances are the malware will not be detected by most of the antiviruses. So many malwares that you find in the wild, most of them are usually compressed or packed. Okay, so common compressors are UPX, then there is VM Protect, then there are some online packing tools as well. Then you have your WinRAR, and then there is Camida. So the most important packer is UPX. Okay, so UPX is the one that is used by several of the malware authors to pack their executables. Okay, so packed executables, packers compress or encrypt the executables. So malware authors often protect executables with packers because they want to make it more difficult to analyze, and also they want to make it the executable of smaller size. So the unpacked code is the packed code is unpacked in memory at runtime. Okay, so I'll just show you one demo of UPX. This is the UPX tool. Okay, so it says that ultimate packer for executables. Okay, so what you generally do in order to pack any binary, you just type UPX. Obviously, you need to install UPX before, first of all, right? So what you do is just type UPX space and the name of the file. For example, now I want to compress this lab6 to compress me.exe. Just notice the size here, 40 KB. Okay, this is the size of this binary here. And after you pack this, just notice the change in size. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this command and we'll observe the change in size. So when I click on this, so what it says that the file size is from 40960 to 16384 bytes. So there is a 40% compression time. Okay. Now you observe this file size, it just says 16 KB. Okay. So now when you try to analyze this, when you try to open this in PE Studio, you'll see that it is very, very different from what it was before it was filed. The strings have been reduced. Okay. Then there is the imports have been reduced. Virus total the entry is different. Okay. So these are the several basically differences when you try to pack an executable. Okay. So now we have the packer structure. Okay, so packer structure, what it looks like, there is this original file and then there is packed executable. So after packing, what happens is the section, the init section is converted into a packed section. Okay. So an execution operation of a packed executable file. So in the packed executable, what happens is there is this PE header run and then the unpacking section. So unpacking section is responsible for taking the pack section and unpacking it in memory. Okay, so this is the final unpack section. After unpacking, you can see that it has been unpacked in memory. Okay. So then there is a packer functional components. What are the components of a packer? So there is this encryption or compression algorithm, and there is decryption engine, then there is protection engine. In that protection engine, we have code obfuscator, anti-debugger, anti-VM, and anti-decom. So these are advanced, strategies that are used by a packer to pack a file. So these are some common packers which are there: UPX, ASPAC, Armadillo, Thanida, VM Protect. Okay, so the demo already gave. So these are some online antivirus and sandboxes that we can use to analyze a binary. Okay. Okay, so this was just a short introduction to reverse engineering and analysis. So if you have any questions, you can ask. If you want the slides here as well, I'll just share the slides with, I'll just coordinate with one of my team members and share the slides with you. Okay. So this is just an example of Lab 6.2 in Coco Sandbox. So this earlier we just tried to perform an analysis on this particular binary. So this is just an online malware sandbox tool, which is showing us that okay, what exactly happened, how it was executed. It's showing static analysis, extract analysis, network analysis. You can see where this. You can see that it tried to connect to practical analysis. You can see there are several of the indicators that are there for the binary. Okay. So this is just a very, very basic, introduction just to get you started in reverse engineering analysis. Just very, very basic. What if the malware code is obfuscated? Can the studio pick up the API used? So whenever a malware is obfuscated, what happens is, let's say this is compressme.exe, it is obfuscated. So what we do is we try to open it. Okay. So when you see the imports here, okay, you're getting 3, 4, 5 imports here. Okay. Now let's try to open any other the unpacked executable. Let me just try to open the unpacked executable. Just open it. And then you can see the imports here. So there is a drastic difference between the imports used here and here. So what he has asked is if it's able to pick up the API use. So yeah, the PE2B is able to pick up the API use, but not all of them. It's only able to pick up the APIs used, very few of the APIs used. Okay, so get proc address, load library, exit. So these are only 5 APIs that are picked in the tagged or compressed malware. But in the your non-compressed malware, you can see that there are several functions here. So that's why malware authors use tools like UPX to tag their executable. So they are not able to analyze the malware properly. So if you want to unpack the executable, you can also just simply type UPX-V and then the name of the tag file. So it says that unpacked one file. Okay, so you can see the size is restored to 40 KB. Now, when you try to open it in vStudio again, you'll see that all the imports will be visible now. Okay, so 49 imports, we can see the 49 imports here. Okay, so this is what happens when binary is tagged. Any other questions? Okay. So thank you guys. Thanks a lot. So we'll meet again on Sunday. I'll just get the schedule for next week. Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll share the PPT.